Good day, everybody, and welcome to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. Today, we are tackling the Akkala region of Zelda Breath of the Wild and attempting to make the end game, or this portion, kind of, a little bit more of a tutorial-esque look at the game. But while we're taking the time to look through this, I figured why not take a little bit of a break from talking about exclusively Zelda and look at what makes difficulty in a game more interesting or more fun. And I'm sure there are people out there who have made better um, tutorials or better statements about difficulty than I ever will. I'm aware of this. But my belief is that a game does need some semblance of challenge to be entertaining. Some games are a lot more difficult than others. This is just a fact of life. You are not going to be able to look at Super Mario Galaxy as being equally difficult in comparison to a game like Zelda Breath of the Wild. Because ultimately, Mario Galaxy is not designed with difficulty being a forefront feature of the game. Neither is Breath of the Wild. Both of these games are designed to be games that are accessible, easy to reach, easy to get into, and easy to understand what's going on and how to make the most of it. But what I love about these games, despite what I consider to be less than stellar in terms of difficulty, in terms of personal engagement as a direct result of this, these games, through their creativity and their use of everything that they effectively are trying to learn and trying to gain, they make the games fun. They make them interesting or fun to explore, and that's kind of the beauty of this era of gaming now, is that exploration, that feeling of finding something new is always just around the corner. Now, some games, for me at least, enter into what I personally consider a flow state. Flow is effectively when a task is challenging enough to keep an individual engaged, while also being easy enough and, dare I say, almost repetitive enough, or has a decent consistency to what it is, that an individual can effectively get themselves at the absolute peak of productivity. Flow, for some, is a moment or a period of time of perfect focus. And easy games have a habit of being games that can be entered into flow state more readily than incredibly difficult ones. As soon as frustration gets added into the mix of what's happening for the player, it becomes more of a deterrent to actually get involved the way that flow would demand. This isn't a bad thing, but it is something that could potentially be used to explain certain players' drive to play harder or easier games than those of the individuals around them. Now, this is kind of a point where I'm going to say that I am not an ideal gamer. Generally speaking, what some players will find boring or excessive, I simply find as being average. I don't necessarily need everything to be handed out to me or be absurdly one way or the other. but I do need, in some capacity, for there to be a level of challenge involved in a game for me to get really involved. So, a few games that come to mind are games like the more recent Assassin's Creed, being more open world-esque, more about learning how to use the systems that the game has in mind to be able to allow the player to be whatever they need to be in order to beat the game. But one that I think kind of showcases my personal feelings towards this is a game that was gifted to me for its Zelda-esque nature. Now, this is one of those things where I will always say I have a weird taste in games. But if you have played Immortals Phoenix Rising, I'd say that it's one of those games that fits a rather specific niche and an interesting mold, just as a direct result of what it is. Immortals Phoenix Rising, for all intents and purposes, is a Zelda clone with a little bit of flavoring of the Greek pantheon of gods. The entire point of the game is that you are effectively a Link-esque figure trying to help the gods out of a very dangerous situation. Now, without getting too far into it, the combat of that game is very similar to Zelda. In fact, many aspects of the game are very similar to Zelda, from flying to teleportation to the load times, even how Phoenix and Link's different outfits have different combat or movement utility throughout the game. All of these things make the two of them very comparable. But where I think Zelda holds up better actually is in the way that intellect and thought goes into the combat. Now, I don't want to make it sound like I'm ragging on a game or another one doing something that I personally prefer. If I'm being honest, Zelda Breath of the Wild has a much more segmented, stilted a running in type of combat than Phoenix does. But Immortals Phoenix Rising has this very fluid, very close range combat system that doesn't necessarily require a whole lot of additional thought to make it work properly. This, in some capacity or another, means that for most of the game that I've played so far, it's been very combat-oriented, but the combat encounters have blurred together. What ended up starting as something incredibly fresh, incredibly fluid, incredibly fast-paced because it was something different, ended up changing into something more akin to almost like one of those cheat games you play. You know the ones, the guilty pleasures. And part of that is because Immortals Phoenix Rising, now a few years old, has systems in mind and in place that are meant to make it approachable to a different audience than Breath of the Wild was meant to. Breath of the Wild's approachability was meant to be based on the fact that it was for a system that almost anybody could get into. Everybody could play Breath of the Wild without a moment's hesitation. It was about the exploration, about the continuous growth of your character and yourself over time. It was about learning the world, hunting for treasure, and apparently blowing yourself through walls, because that is exactly how we're going to make this work today. But games that tried to mimic this particular style of gameplay end up feeling hollow by comparison, at least for me. because games that try to be Breath of the Wild without understanding all of what makes Breath of the Wild so fun, so interesting, and so engaging end up being kind of, I believe the proper word is stilted in one direction or another. That its entire ideology, its world that you try to get immersed in, just simply doesn't seem to fit. As if it was pulled from one game and into a totally different genre. This is the issue that I run into a lot of the time when talking about video games as a whole. When talking about video games, when playing games that are almost out of place for what they are aiming to be, it ends up feeling like something is amiss. Like the plans that were put into place to make the game just didn't quite mesh. All the pieces are there. You can see it, but you can't really. It almost feels like there should be something else, something more involved when you're playing it. And this is a really odd feeling that I get when playing certain games. When I'm playing Metroid Prime or a similar game, for me, it's always about the adventure. It's about the getting around. It is about gaining access to new areas and trying to find ways to make that world more open, easier to navigate. The more you get, the easier it becomes to navigate. The more you can get, the more you can navigate, and so on and so forth. It becomes a very unique lock and key style game, where the further you get, the easier it is to move around. And this lock and key style gameplay, in some games, works great. In some games, a little less consistently. And this lock and key style gameplay has existed in Zelda forever, since even the original, and really got refined in later games like like Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, where you would continue to get new keys in the form of different tools, different items that make traversal more readily available to the player. This was important and part of the plan of the game. But it comes with a little bit of a side story here. With the dissection of certain games like Breath of the Wild, Breath of the Wild was meant to be everything a Zelda was, and somehow everything it wasn't. Taking what is Zelda and flipping it on its head, changing the trajectory of the series to be more open-ended or open-minded to different facets of the game that were never truly given the time of day that it should have. Breath of the Wild, for all of its strengths, all of its weaknesses, is a game that is simply a dissection. It's a meta-analysis. It is as Zelda as any other Zelda is. But it doesn't feel like a Zelda. It doesn't feel like a traditional Zelda. Partially because one of the defining core features of Zelda is the lock and key style gameplay. But instead of hiding a key away in certain areas like they do in Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, in virtually any other Zelda game out there, they put all of the keys to the kingdom on the Great Plateau and told you, okay, yeah, here's your stuff, go play, go figure out what these keys can and cannot do. You have access to everything almost immediately. You gain access to a couple fancier types of swords and some new bows, some interesting arrow varieties, horses, and other items that you come across throughout the duration of the game. But nothing really meets that same level as getting your first set of bombs in Ocarina of Time's Dodongo's Cavern and realizing, hey, I can use this for a lot of different stuff, can't I? And having to go back through the game, one region at a time, trying to figure out exactly how much you can get away with now, how many new areas are available to the player. Instead, it became, oh, I see a bombable wall. I see an area of stuff I can mine. And this is good. This is part of the breakdown of Zelda. But by approaching it in this half-hearted way, in a way that, no, half-hearted isn't what I want to say. In a way that ignores such a large portion of what became part of Zelda's identity as a franchise, it became much more difficult to be able to actually ignore the small details that didn't feel like they fit. And that's the thing, is Breath of the Wild changed so much about The Legend of Zelda and the franchise as a whole that it's really hard to ignore the small details that don't feel like they're supposed to fit. It is really hard to ignore the rather small number of enemy variety, as you effectively have moblins, bokoblins, you have chew jellies, you have the, you have Keese, you have Lizalfos, and you have Octoroks. That's every single enemy in the game, effectively. Throw in the odd Hinox and a couple Molduga, and you're good, right? That's effectively what you end up with in Breath of the Wild as a enemy variety problem. All these things add up. And while I wish that there was an easy solution to this, the easiest solution is ironically not Breath of the Wild. It's now Tears of the Kingdom. See, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom both worked around this world. But where Breath of the Wild tried to make the game more accessible through effectively making it that you could go anywhere at any point in time, you simply needed to understand what you were getting into for the most part. Tears of the Kingdom took a radically different approach to it. Its whole identity was around the fact that you could do anything in any order, you could do whatever you wanted. But I've always found that its identity as a game was designed around the fact that you, the player, could think a way around the problem. And the solution wasn't as clear-cut as in other games. It became a question of what could I actually do to get across this pit? Am I going to freeze a chunk of ice and throw a bomb at myself, launching me across a massive chasm? Or am I going to create a giant ATST-style walker and walk across this giant chasm, preventing myself from ever falling into this pit to begin with? That's kind of the questions that become more common in Tears of the Kingdom. It is less about combat, less about trying to find a way across through traditional means, and more about every solution has a problem, and every problem has a solution. The question is, which solution do we use for this one? And maybe I'm overthinking this. After all, it's just a video game, right? But reality is that every game continues to have something unique, something interesting, something different that it brings to the table with it. It just so happens that Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, are two that have had a very significant impact over the last 10 years worth of gaming. Yeah, I should have hit the button there. And I'm not even just considering the raw impact of a game here, because both games have done something totally unique. Breath of the Wild effectively revolutionized what could be considered the open world genre of gaming. While older games definitely had this capability, the open world genre really started to take off in the days of games like Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. And Breath of the Wild took what was there and asked the question of how can we make this better? How can we change this formula to make it so that the player doesn't necessarily have to be in certain circumstances? And I understand that I am not the best to talk about those particular games, as I have never finished any of the Elder Scrolls, much to my disappointment. But I can say that Zelda... How do I want to word this? Breath of the Wild takes the approach of an open world game. Generally speaking, there are two approaches. Vast empty worlds and checklists. Now, I've mentioned this a couple times in prior videos that some games end up just being a massive checklist of things to sort out, things to do. And sometimes, and I'm going to point the finger at Ubisoft here, their games such as the Assassin's Creed franchise, especially the older games, were very much a checklist style of game. You had X number of things that you could accomplish in a certain region of the game. You go from A to B to C to D, you deal with the problems associated with said area, and then you moved on. And you moved on to the next one. Ocarina of Time had a very similar, albeit very different approach, and I'm going to lump Wind Waker in here with the vast empty world. You have an open world to explore. That's not the issue. The issue is that while you can explore it, how much of it is actually quote-unquote worth exploring is debatable. The entire southern portion of Hyrule Field, between Kokiri Forest and Lake Hylia, I'm using this area as a general statement here, is pretty vast. There's a lot of trees and a couple pea hats. That's effectively all you have to look forward to in there. Now, I'm pretty sure there's a couple Skulltulas and whatnot, but by and large, there's not much to go into there. Wind Waker is a collection of 36 to 48 islands, and most of those islands are so small that you would be forgiven for missing them altogether. This is a major problem that comes with the, shall I call it, empty open world games. The checklist games end up being, I have A, B, C, D to do, so let's just go do that. And a lot of players, especially ones like me, get hung up on the fact that there is something to do. It becomes the question of, can I beat this without needing specific tools, or am I able to do this right off the bat as it is right now? Breath of the Wild, ironically, is one of those games that kind of feels like a checklist game. But it does the checklist system very differently than a lot of games do. The goal of the Breath of the Wild checklist system, I just buggered myself over there. Breath of the Wild's checklists are very different than a Ubisoft. The Ubisoft system is effectively you are given a list of things to do, and you do it. The Breath of the Wild checklist system is you have a certain number of things to do. You have certain main goals to accomplish, but you're not given the distinct number. You're not shown exactly where it is. The game doesn't throw all 900 Korok seeds and say, here's a map, go find them. They give you a there are Korok seeds out there. I'm not sure how many. Have fun. They have there are shrines out there. These are used to improve Link's stamina, his life. Get out there, find them, power up, fight Ganon. That's effectively what you are given. You have the checklist to an extent, but they don't force it on you. They don't say this is how it's done. And in that regard, I think that Breath of the Wild itches that feeling of discovery. Something that I honestly don't get from very many games these days. That aha moment, that moment of what's around the next corner. Now, having played through and beaten Breath of the Wild 3-4 times, and Tears of the Kingdom now once as well, there's not much left of the traditional Hyrule that I haven't explored. And I did have a profile of Breath of the Wild that did collect all 900 Korok seeds. That's part of the reason I'm not doing that here. But regardless of how many Koroks, how many things to do, it ends up being very much the world is your oyster. Just gotta open it up. That's horrible. It becomes more about trying to see what's around the next bend, what's around the next corner. Is there a Korok hidden in that tree? Maybe I should climb to the top to find out. Maybe I should check this rock or figure out if there's something more to this system over here. Maybe there's something else over this way. Why is there a circle of rocks in this pond? Or lily pads, or something. All of these tie into one another as being part of the same system, the same world, but are somehow vastly different approaches to it. They all entice and are meant to get the player thinking about where to next. You have dozens, hundreds of small little bokoblin camps that you are to take down and defeat. And sure, not all of them are going to be filled with gold and new weapons and tools. You can't expect absolutely everything to work out 100% of the time. But what you can get out of it is a game that tries to go the extra mile in making sure that its player base has something more to look forward to around the next bend. Something more to chuckle at when they throw a banana at the nearest Yiga clan member because, I wonder if this works. And that's some of the glory of what makes this game. And I know I talk at length about it, and I call it the second coming of some of the greatest games out there. I know that Breath of the Wild and every game I play is flawed. But often I find it comes down to acknowledging those flaws and deciding to love the game anyways. That truly defines how I want to approach games and how I want to approach gaming. It would be one thing if I played a game and every time I played a new one I was upset and miserable that I didn't have certain things go the way I wanted, or wasn't able to do certain things. I think that's something that we are all guilty of in some capacity. But acknowledging the good that comes with each game, the funny moments, the ridiculous situations that come around when you play a game for the first time, those don't go away. We simply learn to ignore them. And I believe that we all could learn to be a little more open-minded, have a little bit more faith in what comes around the next bend. And Breath of the Wild has always been one of those games that I approach with an open-minded nature. It's one of those games that every time I boot it up, it's about the discovery. It's one of those games that doesn't have a season, a time of year. It's one of those games that no matter what happens, there's always a good time for Zelda. And that's my personal take on it. A personal drive to play the game. This is effectively a cozy game for me. And some people love cozy games, some people don't. Ultimately, who am I to judge? But my belief in it being a quote-unquote cozy game relates to the fact that even in the most terrifying or the most gripping circumstances that come through this game, there's still more around the next bend. There's still something that's meant to attract your attention. Maybe it's at the other end of the labyrinth. Maybe it's hidden down below near the depths. Maybe it's floating a mile above your head. In the case of Tears of the Kingdom, probably the last one. But maybe, just maybe, there's more to it. Anywho, in the far northeast corner of the map, you have the Lome Labyrinth, or one of the three. There is one situated in the northeast corner of Akkala, one situated in the northeast corner of the Hebra region, and one located in the southeast section of the Gerudo Desert. Each of these three regions, each of these three labyrinths, are meant to test one's... I believe they're meant to test wisdom, primarily. But they are I suppose a feature of this particular game, allowing the player to get lost a little bit in a maze that should be seen as insurmountable, impossible to get around in without some form of extra help, outside help. These mazes end up being some of my favorite moments in Breath of the Wild, for their sharp departure from the ebb and flow of the pretty standard gameplay that we come across in Breath of the Wild. In this case, the labyrinths act as a different approach to challenges that you don't see all too often in Breath of the Wild as a whole. If you look at, let's say, the Great Plateau, you're shown where to go, not necessarily how to get there. And it's a good test of trying to find the right tools for the job, using different items like torches and learning how to cook your first meals in the game that really showcase the individual's capability of getting from A to B. But the labyrinths are a different animal entirely. You can see from the very beginning of a labyrinth not only what you're aiming for, but you can see a map from above. Now, this ordinarily would mean that you have the path forward. Except the path forward is rarely as simplistic as what the map shows. In fact, this particular maze is actually the easiest of the three, in my opinion. The reason behind it is because the pathway is not requiring you to dip underneath hidden obstacles from the map without having to worry too much about it. It ends up being a really unique circumstance overall, just on the grounds of it actually working the way it's intended. Anywho, with all of this being said and done, I'm getting a little bit worn out. My throat is getting a little sore here. So I have, I suppose, two more things I intend to do tonight. The first is to irritate every single one of the guardians in this room by collecting a very fancy circlet. The second is to get out of here. And third is to make it to Skull Lake. Oh cool, I didn't get blown up. That's nice. Skull Lake will be the final, I suppose, location to reach in this particular run tonight. And the reason I want to stop at Skull Lake is because the last of the Akkala shrines that has yet to be covered requires one of Dinral's scales. Now, if you don't know who Dinral is, effectively there are three guardians, or rather three dragons, in various regions across Hyrule. Nadra is on the Lanayru mountain, directly to the south of Akkala, south of the Zora domain, but a little bit east of Hitano village, and is covered in black malice spots and those weird eyeball monster things. Dinral is the fire dragon, and typically appears on the north edge of Death Mountain, and makes its way through the chasm between the Hebra mountain range and the, what is it? I want to say it's Faerun, but I'm pretty sure I got it wrong. It's the province directly to the west of Eldon. It has the, whatchamacallit? The Lost Woods in it. Anyways, east of the Lost Woods there is a chasm that Dinral goes through. The third is Farosh, and Farosh flies across about half the world, sometimes ending up in the southern Lome ruins, over by the southern coastline of Hyrule, and other times ending up in the northern Gerudo Highlands. Either way you look at it, these three dragons have one item we need: a scale. These three dragon scales will open up one shrine each. It is not necessarily imperative, but at the very least ideal, to get these scales to the appropriate locations, specifically because it is possible then to further increase Link's strength, etc., 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 as you always do. But also because with the start of Death Mountain, we're digging into some territory that I haven't dug into in a while. Death Mountain, especially the first time going or climbing Death Mountain and heading towards the Goron City, is some of the most dangerous and difficult terrain that you can cross in the game. Requires a little bit more forward thinking than your average introductory zone that we get into in Breath of the Wild. And thus, there's going to be a little bit more talking points in getting us to the the Goron City, than most other games ever get. But with all of that being said, we will tackle that problem next time, along with a brief history of the Gorons and the notable ones that show up throughout the Zelda history. If you like what you see, I would love if you left a like, drop a subscribe, and maybe a comment or two about what you think. What are your beliefs? Any unique theories about the Zelda franchise as a whole? I'd love to read them. Anywho, with all of that being said, I hope that you all have a fantastic night, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Until next time, have a good one.